Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland, and this week on Red, White, and Blue, my co-host is Dr. Jennifer Clark, who is Director of Graduate Studies in Political Science at the University of Houston, also Associate Professor. So first, welcome, Dr. Clark.
Thank you.
So I have a lot of distinguished intellectuals with me this week. I'll see if I can keep up. Our guests, and by the way, I'll introduce our guests, I'll talk about our topic. First, we have Dr. Heather Evans, who's been on before. Welcome back at the Department of Political Science at Sam Houston State. Thanks for making the trip down. We appreciate that. And finally, Dr. David Schein, Director of CSB Graduate Programs, University of St. Thomas, and author of the new book, The Decline of America, 100 Years of Leadership Failures. And that brings us to what our topic is this week, which is the U.S. presidency, an analysis of leadership. And I can say, Dr. Schein, reading your book, it's kind of depressing, but not surprising that we've had a string of mediocre, ineffective presidents for years and years. My first question to you is not that, though. How has America survived this dearth of leadership since Woodrow Wilson?
Glad you asked that. Funny how that goes. Yes, we have a fabulous country, and we have survived because we have a hardworking, productive, diverse population, and we have worked well despite our leadership. We've also had some accidental things that have gone well. So one of the things I talk with my students about is that we've made laws and decisions for one purpose that have actually served other purposes. And part of the reason that we've been successful to date is that we've educated our population. And while people criticize our public schooling system, however it works, we have launched the modern era starting with the 1930s, actually. During the Great Depression, we passed the wage hour law to force employers to hire adults and not allow children to work. So then we had to fix where the children were going to go. And we say, well, gee, we'll make education mandatory. That actually launched the United States forward as an educated power. And then after World War II, we had the GI Bill, which launched the college graduation. In fact, we're here at the University of Houston. The University of Houston had a tremendous development following World War II, as we had people available to go to school who had finances. Rather than put them into the workforce, we said, let's put them into education. And so by educating our population, our people take less vacation. We work harder. We work more hours in a day than just about any other major country. So I think we do it despite our government, and especially more so in more recent times.
Dr. Evans, do you agree with the premise of Dr. Schein that we've had a string of pretty mediocre at best presidents, and somehow we've muddled through?
So I don't. I actually, from the political science standpoint, so I don't study the presidency per se, but I study lots of work on the presidents. And when I read the title of the book, I thought The Decline of America, and I understand that perhaps America is not where we would like for it to be, but I'm not sure that presidents alone can be responsible for that. And I also think that looking at presidents, you can't look at them in kind of a vacuum. And you allude to this in the book as well, that you need to take into account things that have happened before or things that happen with Congress to decide then whether someone has been an effective president or not. I'm still very skeptical that we are in a decline per se when it comes to the presidency. And I think political scientists generally would agree with me on that, so I'd be happy to talk about that a little bit more.
I want to ask you, what do you think makes for a great leader in the White House?
Well, it's reaching a point, and I say this toward the end of the book, that I think we're going to need to have more than one person, as many other countries have gone with the president and the prime minister, and have someone domestically focused and someone internationally focused. So perhaps the evaluation is kind of like a student comes in and says, well, this was a really unfair test. So since you had to do both things and you did them both, usually one really badly, the other one may be okay, talking domestic versus international, and this covers certainly our last handful of presidents, that part of it is that we've set up almost an impossible challenge, because you're either out there interacting with the world effectively and you've let the home front die, or you've done a really good job and maybe fixed some things domestically, but then everybody says, yeah, but the United States is slipping down the tube nationally, internationally. So it's, I think that's part of the problem is that we expect an awful lot of our president, and as Heather just said, there's only so much we can get out of one person.
Yeah, and I would add to that, so I think that when we look at the presidents and what they've been able to accomplish, there is this domestic area, there's an international area. So what policy-wise have they been able to accomplish? What is it even, and you talk about this in your book in terms of a personality or personal ability as a president. Do they inspire? Do they not? Do we, how do we look at their goals? Do they accomplish what they set forth to accomplish? How does the economy look after these presidents? How has it suffered? Has it gone well for us as Americans? And I think when people vote, they vote on the basis of, well, am I better off now than I was before they got in office? Or am I better off voting for them, given their promises, than voting for someone else, given theirs? So do they follow through on their promises?
Which is an interesting question about that. We haven't talked about the elephant in the room because your book doesn't cover the current occupant of the Oval Office, President Trump. What is your impression of him, given through the lens that you looked at with all the other presidents at this point, midway through his first term?
Well, I'm not a political scientist. I have a background in management and law and ethics. So I looked at the American presidents through the lens of ethical leadership, or in Bill Clinton's case, the complete absence of ethics. And so he might have had a higher grade if he had any ethics at all, but because some good things did happen. But as you alluded to, is Clinton inherited an upswing economy, and I do have an economics background, and so I looked at the fact that the U.S. economy is a massive economy. It's still the largest in the world, and it moves in a giant wave function. So if you happen to be president at the top of the wave, or hopefully at the bottom of the wave but on the way up, you are always going to look good. And Clinton, in my opinion, of the presidents, Wilson through Obama, Clinton was the luckiest president. He hit almost every good break you could get, including the fact there was a strong third-party candidate when he ran against an incumbent, George H.W. Bush, in 1992, and the economy was in the dumpster, but the numbers indicate it was already on the way up at the time the election had happened. And so realistically, if Bush had stood for re-election in 91 or 93, because the economy would have been better, he would have won. So Clinton hit it very nicely. The other bizarre thing with Clinton is that he ended up with a Republican Congress, and Clinton is one incredible politician. Clinton knew that in order to have a successful administration, I'm going to have to get along with the Republican Congress, and he did something that I think in retrospect most Democrats would condemn today, which is welfare reform. And his other saving grace was the fact that the Clinton care, which was probably along the lines of what Obamacare turned out to be, Clinton care never came up for a vote in Congress while they still had a Democrat majority. So it's interesting because he got saved by the Republicans, ironically, who also did not vote to impeach him, by the way. And he hit these economic cycles. So it really is very interesting to study the background of the economic cycle versus what the president has thought of or accomplished.
You could also argue in terms of President Clinton, he also tried to stay out of the way. The economy is getting better. He just kind of let it happen, as opposed to what we find, at least in this era of Democratic leadership, is intervention into the economy to a significant degree.
Exactly, and there's some numbers that support that strongly, because in looking at the 8 years of Obama, the economy actually improved. Of course, he came in at the bottom. It was the Great Recession, after all. It was the second worst incident after the Great Depression. But when he came in, the economy actually statistically makes a recovery, but then it doesn't nosedive, but it doesn't prosper. And it does it for 4 or 5 years, the last 4 or 5 years he's in office. In fact, it's rather remarkable that he got reelected, because it was trending downward at the time he got reelected. But again, a little bit of luck perhaps is that he ran against a very weak Republican candidate in that election. I mean, there was no inspiration. There was nobody driving the bus, so to speak. But a lot of the policies, I think, influenced it. And this is one of the most difficult things to sort out, which is the massive economic cycle. What does the president do to influence the cycle? The president can't change the cycle. The president's on the bus, but he's probably not driving, but he does have an impact. And I think that Trump has had an impact, and I think Obama had a negative impact on the economy, because they hyped regulation when they saw the economy inching up a bit. And what happened is that they got a little too aggressive, and I'm talking not about him personally, but the head of EPA, the head of Department of Labor, the people that really influence how the economy rolls. And the perception was it was an anti-business economy and a overly regulated economy. Now, whether that's true or not doesn't make any difference, because so much of this is driven by emotion. Mm-hmm. It's like, do we feel good? Are we going to build a new plant and stuff like that? Mm-hmm. And switching to Trump seems to be able to get people to build new plants and rah, rah, rah. Whether it ultimately works out well, numerically he's done pretty well. So
do you feel like that Hillary Clinton actually got handed from Barack Obama the black bean? The black bean meaning the economy is overregulated, it's stagnant, and you have given the opening now for a candidate like Donald Trump when he ran to talk about deregulation, get the economy moving again, etc. Could that have been the reason that she ends up losing?
That is part of it, I think. The black bean, or really it's having an incumbent in there for an extra term. It's very hard in American politics to have a president, right, the third act. It just doesn't happen. And so she was running as essentially, if you really like what happened with Obama, then please elect me. And then she was also using the personal characteristics of Trump in her advertising, which you discuss in your book, the idea that, you know, in terms of ethics, do we want Trump in the presidency, or what about me? Essentially, she was saying, look at me, I'm ethical, and that's a question that is up for debate. But both candidates had these ethical questions looming over their heads. She, however, was running essentially as Obama's third term.
But to what extent should ethics really be a part of this? Shouldn't it really be about policies produced and how the economy's doing?
Okay, I wrote a book on ethical leadership, and I teach business ethics. All right, let's see.
But make a case.
Okay. I think ethics are extremely important, and I think the sad fact of the American presidency, reaching back a little further than Clinton, Jimmy Carter, as far as I can tell, is one of the nicest, most decent people on the face of the earth. And the consensus is an awful presidency. Was he an awful president? I don't know, but he had an awful presidency, and including the Iran hostage crisis, which pretty much took him out of the picture, even though he was an incumbent. He was a successful business person. He had served in the military, graduated from Annapolis. So all sorts of good things you can say about Jimmy Carter, but being a great president and a great leader wasn't one of them. So ironically, you look back at Clinton and you say, yeah, it's a guy who has zero ethics. I mean, I can't tell anything that Clinton is responsible for that displays any sense of ethics. I mean, you know, we use the term amoral. He wasn't unethical. He had no sense of ethics. It didn't matter.
So what about, though, Trump? Going back to that
well,
question,
let's talk about Trump's
ethics.
There's a lot of weird things that have happened. One of the things is that while we're being told that he's meeting his promises, I actually still have some contact with the government, and I can tell you that there's been excessive spending by high officials, secretaries, cabinet secretaries. That's, in my opinion, unethical. But more importantly, when Trump promises the American public, we're going to have a new deal here, and we're going to make Washington accountable, and we're going to make America great, all that's great. He may be doing it, but when you have cabinet ministers who are, expending millions of hard-earned tax dollars on ridiculous stuff, it's really unfair. I haven't seen any particular strong performance from a single member of the president's cabinet. And one of the things I look at going back to Harding in my book is the fact that he appointed people who were criminals. Harding had 3 people that were key people of his administration.
But were they effective?
I don't think they were very effective. They did the Teapot Dome scandal during Harding. But
what about Sessions, though? I mean,
Sessions is. I think Sessions is.
Even though he does.
Well,
have some issues
putting
with
my
Sessions.
lawyer hat on, I think Sessions is a non-entity. I mean, I don't think Sessions has really asserted himself in any effective way, and that's unfortunate because I think he's the top lawyer for the country, and as you know, we don't usually have lawyers who are shrinking violets. So he, I think, was pretty successful as senator, but looking at Trump's decision process, Sessions is in that job, as I understand it, because he was the first U.S. senator to come out in favor of Trump. That is his distinction. That doesn't mean he was a bad senator, but he has been a non-element as the Attorney General, and I think that's a problem that rolls over on Trump. Trump made that decision.
And when we talk about ethics and whether they should matter, if you ask college students right now, what do you know about Bill Clinton? They know about the scandals. And then they'll mention the economy. They'll be like, the economy was also good from what I've been told, because we're all getting old now, right? So the economy,
they're studying.
Yes, exactly. They're like, I think I heard of someone named Monica, but that's what they remember. And now with the Trump presidency moving forward, when people vote or when they look back on his presidency, will they remember him in an ethical way, or will they remember something about tax breaks and all of these additional policies? I don't know, because what I'm seeing just from the public is that they remember the ethical sorts of things.
Yeah, that's because that's salacious.
That's right.
And the other stuff is just out there. It's interesting. You find that Trump and Clinton, pretty similar guys, right, in terms of ethics, right? I think that's a fair statement. And they were friends. And you go back, they were friends. I mean, he was a big supporter. Trump was a big supporter of the Clintons, going back for years and years. So that may make sense, doesn't it? Anyway, I wanted to ask this question I was wondering about, because reading your book, it said the highest score was Truman, you got a B-. What does it take to get an A or B in your mind for our presidents?
Well, as I
said, besides being George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, or Abraham Lincoln.
Those are the 3 people I would give A's to, and they weren't in my book, so they're not. That's why there's no A's in the book. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while. It was one of the inspirations for my book. And I can tell you that the more I learn about George Washington, the higher I rate George Washington. And he was an extraordinary figure, partially because he turned down things that normal human beings do, which is, hey, we'll make you king. And he said, no, you're going to call me Mr. President. Hey, we're really happy with you. Why don't you stay here? He said, no, I'm going to move about 15 miles down the road to Mount Vernon. It's your turn to get in here and run the place. Those were very important standards that he brought forward that I think set important values today, is the return to home, the basis in being a modest person who says, and that's why Truman got such a high grade for me. Ironically, of all the presidents, he is a president who did not attend college. He's the only one of the 17 that I examined, and he was a modest person. He didn't go out to aggrandize himself. So I think what we need is, you need, unfortunately today in our complex world, you need a superstar who is modest. And that's real hard to get elected because you've got to run around kind of like Trump's doing and say, I'm really terrific and I did all this terrific stuff. And if you don't do that, it makes it very hard to get elected because we're dealing in tweets. I know you have an article out on Twitter, several articles, it's a Twitter society. And so how do you communicate high ethical standards, great depth of understanding of, I mean, we're dealing with very complex things. We have the new Innovation Center a short distance from here where the old Sears building is. And so I was attending a presentation on that the other day. And one of the questions that came up, a very sad question, is we've got street people right there, right across the street from where the old Sears building is. It's a serious problem. We have people camping there. A Houstonian asked me, and I told them about the new venture, and I said, we're very excited about it. All the area universities are going to participate in this. And she said to me, I don't feel safe there. I wouldn't go there unless they fix the problem. So the question came up is, and then she went into a discourse about really fixing the problem, not just moving people who we don't want to see, so we move them to another neighborhood. And that's a great answer, except I'd love to hear the solution. So we have we're down to the hard stuff. The easy stuff is pretty much worked out. We need to really figure out affordable health care, effective public education, handling problems like people on the street. We've done very well at moving women forward in the workforce. It's really making progress for real. We have not done as well moving people of color forward, especially African American males are still at a great disadvantage in our workforce. These are really hard problems to fix.
Well, just like with illegal immigration, the border, they're all tough issues, and the Congress doesn't move them, so people look to the president for leadership. In this case, Trump, of course, recently came out and said we should end birthright citizenship, I think, to start the conversation and to see what it should be done, which, by the way, will be a subject of a separate show that we do. In fact, you mentioned a number of topics that sound really good. The homeless problem is very important. I don't think it's the president's problem for that. But let me ask this question for you. Who do you rate as the top presidents? Because he gave us, Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln, and Harry Truman, and I guess that's pretty much it.
So I would be with him on some of those topics, or some of those presidents. So Lincoln, Washington. I would rate FDR higher than the grades you gave him in the book. And in the survey of political scientists, so APSA, the American Political Science Association, asked political scientists who only study the presidency to rate the presidents, kind of give them a score from 0 to 100, and then they compiled all of that to figure out who's the top president. They also asked questions about partisanship, because I think whenever we rate presidents, we have to take our partisanship into account. We're in the same way that we shouldn't be evaluating one president on the basis of just what happened in their time in office, we also need to realize we have biases, right? So when we split that out by whether you were a conservative political scientist or a liberal political scientist, we find generally the same ratings. There's a little bit of movement. So like Obama, he's up in the top 10 as an average. If you are more of a conservative political scientist, you might place him around 13. But generally, people would say people like Lincoln and Washington, those are at the top of the list.
Ronald Reagan.
Reagan is up there as well, yes. Now, at the bottom of the list, we find Trump. And for many, they place him at dead last. For conservative political scientists, they actually rank him 40th. So Trump has some problems in terms of how he is viewed by even people who study the presidents. So whether he respects institutional norms, for instance.
Well, I'm sure that's a short answer. He doesn't. He doesn't respect that.
Right.
And we're down to our last minute, so I want to give Dr. Clark the last word. Who's your favorite president?
My favorite president? Right. I suppose it would be Barack Obama.
Okay, there you go. And by the way, what happens over time, as you also know, we get further away from their presidency. Right. There's also a reevaluation, and they either go up, they go down. You take a look at it. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you on Trump, it'll all be about the economy, just like James Carville said. gets the economy stupid. If the economy continues to do well with his economic regulations, I think people are going to be able to deal with all the mishigas that goes around him, because that's part of the way he operates. And I think I can't explain it, and I never thought he'd be nominated. So that tells you what I know, and never thought he'd get elected. So fascinating conversation. So I want to thank you first, Dr. Clark. Thanks for coming. I appreciate you taking the time. Dr. Schein, book's fascinating, and Heather Evans, I always enjoy having your insight. So thanks for coming down, and folks, thanks for being here, and we'll be back next week with another exciting show.